Every industry has a graveyard, and if you look closely, you're going to see headstones for absolute giants. Blockbuster, Nokia, Borders, Kodak, Toys R Us. Now, these weren't bad companies. They had great products, incredibly loyal customers, and experienced leaders who were looking at the numbers every single quarter. So why are they gone? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing an autopsy on corporate failure to uncover exactly what sends these industry titans to the grave.
It is a question that literally haunts every CEO and investor out there. Why do seemingly invincible market leaders end up collapsing? Well, here is the uncomfortable truth. Most of these great companies didn't fail because they missed the future or because their leadership just suddenly became incompetent. No, they failed because they understood exactly what was happening in the market, and yet they still couldn't stop it.
You see, these companies failed precisely because they were too well managed. I know that sounds crazy, but they listened to their best customers, they invested heavily in their most profitable products, and they executed their core business models flawlessly. But in doing so, they fell victim to a very specific set of forces. Today, we're breaking down the most important frameworks in innovation strategy. And trust me, once you understand these, you will never look at a company or an industry the exact same way again.
All right, let's jump straight into part one, the technology S-curve.
To really grasp why the ground shifts underneath major corporations, we first have to understand how technology actually improves over time. Most managers make this dangerous, unspoken assumption. They assume progress is linear. You know the thought process. You invest more effort and money, you get proportionally more performance. Double the engineers, double the output. It feels steady, predictable, like a straight line pointing up. But guys, that is almost never how reality works. Technology actually follows an S-curve trajectory.
The best way to think about this S-curve is exactly like learning to play the guitar. When you first pick it up, you're basically just making noise, right? You put in a ton of effort, but your progress is painfully slow. That's the bottom of the S-curve. Limited knowledge, super high uncertainty, and just lots of failed experiments.
Let's break those stages down a bit more. You start with that emergence stage where you're just figuring out the fundamentals. But then, something clicks. You learn your chords, your muscle memory kicks in, and suddenly you're playing actual songs. Progress just explodes. That's the growth stage. There's clear direction and high commitment. But eventually the curve flattens out at the top in the maturity stage. You've been playing for 20 years, and it takes months of intense practice just to get 1% better. The industry literally calls this fishing out. You're hitting the natural limits of the tech, and every additional dollar of R&D produces less and less improvement.
And this brings us to the absolute most dangerous strategic moment for any business. It happens when you are sitting comfortably at the top of your S-curve, while a completely new technology is quietly climbing from the bottom of its own curve. Look at gasoline engines. For a century, they got more efficient and more powerful. But by the 2000s, that curve was flattening. Meanwhile, early electric vehicle technology was sitting at the very bottom of a new S-curve. It was expensive, had short range, and was barely viable. Legacy automakers looked at EVs, saw an unimpressive technology, and just kept optimizing their gas engines. But Tesla didn't. They rode the new S-curve, and now everyone else is scrambling to catch up.
So that's the tech side. Let's move to part two, the adoption curve and the chasm.
Understanding the technology S-curve is really only half the battle, because even if a product is fantastic, it doesn't mean everyone buys it on day one. Adoption happens in distinct waves. Think about a trendy new restaurant opening up downtown. On night one, it's just the hardcore foodies and local bloggers. A few weeks later, the local influencers show up. And then, slowly, if the restaurant survives its first year, you start seeing families going there for Sunday brunch. This is the technology adoption curve in action.
And this brilliantly illustrates what Geoffrey Moore famously called the chasm. You have your early adopters on one side and your early majority on the other. But right in between them is a massive gap. This is the single most dangerous gap in business. It's where early growth just suddenly stalls out and where countless promising startups go to die before they ever reach the mainstream.
So why is crossing this chasm so brutally hard? Well, look at this breakdown of incentives. Innovators and early adopters want a revolution. They want the newest thing, they'll happily tolerate bugs, and they love complex features. But the early majority, the pragmatists, they want evolution. They want a demonstrated return on investment, plug-and-play simplicity, and reliable support. So what the early enthusiasts love is often exactly what the mainstream pragmatists hate. Making a product boring enough for the mainstream to trust is often way harder than inventing the tech in the first place.
Which brings us to the big one. Part 3, Disruptive Innovation.
Now we can bring everything together through the lens of Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen's legendary framework. He drew a really vital distinction between two types of innovation. First, you have sustaining innovation. This is when you just make a good product better for your existing customers. A better camera, a faster processor. Incumbents are great at this. But disruptive innovation is entirely different. A disruptive product is actually initially worse by traditional performance measures, but, and this is key, it's cheaper, simpler, or more convenient, and it appeals to overserved, fringe, or low-end customers that the big guys are completely ignoring.
Let's look at a visual autopsy of Kodak. Take Kodak's photo CD. It was a brilliant sustaining innovation. It let professional photographers put high-quality film photos onto a digital disc. It served their most demanding customers perfectly. But then, look at early Sony digital cameras. The image quality was frankly terrible compared to film. It was objectively worse, but it was incredibly convenient. It appealed to a totally different market of people who just wanted instant memories without the hassle of developing film. Kodak stayed on their sustaining trajectory, while digital cameras rode a disruptive S-curve right past them.
And we see this pattern everywhere. Blockbuster poured money into a sustaining innovation called Game Rush, which just made their massive retail stores slightly better for existing physical media renters. Netflix, meanwhile, introduced DVD by mail. Think about that. You had to wait days for a movie. By traditional metrics of I want to watch a movie tonight, it was worse. But it was immensely convenient, there were no late fees, and it appealed to a totally different segment. Netflix captured the low end, crossed the chasm into streaming, and left Blockbuster in the graveyard.
So how does this play out today? Let's get into part 4, the next AI war.
We are currently watching the ultimate test of these frameworks unfold in real time in the generative AI space. Google is facing an existential crisis straight out of a textbook. In mid-2025, Alphabet shed $250 billion in market cap in a matter of months. Why? Because hundreds of millions of people started turning to AI chatbots like ChatGPT, Perplexity, and DeepSeek for answers instead of Google Search. Here's the kicker. Google actually invented the foundations of generative AI. They have the models. But fully integrating a chatbot means cannibalizing their massive, highly profitable advertising engine. Do they rush in and destroy their own margins to compete? Or do they wait and risk absolute obsolescence? It is the classic innovator's dilemma playing out right before our eyes.
And remember, no company, no matter how dominant, is immune to these relentless cycles of disruption. Clayton Christensen himself noted that the transition from closed, proprietary systems to open, modular architectures happens continuously. He even warned that Apple's tightly integrated iPhone business could eventually be vulnerable to the exact same forces as modular systems like Android grow. The cycle of the S-curve spares absolutely no one.
Which leaves us with the billion, or rather trillion-dollar question. We've seen Kodak, Blockbuster, and Nokia fall into the chasm because they were chopped by their own success. Now, Google understands the S-curve. They know the theory. But knowing the framework and surviving it are two completely different things. Can Google disrupt its own golden goose to survive the AI S-curve, or will they become the wealthiest headstone in the corporate graveyard? Think about that as you watch the internet fundamentally change over the coming months. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes on the curve.